The financial stakeholders celebrate when the new marketing leader slashes the budget and increases the productivity of every advertising dollar. This works great when they're new, but how does the marketing team keep feeding the beast of cutting and trimming? Is pretending to overspend the answer? Is giving up additional customers recommended? Marketing and sales are full of myths, misconceptions, and sometimes flat out lies. Join us as we get out of the echo chamber and chat about the tough act of following budget cuts.
Hello and welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast, where we strive to be a couple of consistent voices of reason in the cacophony of bad marketing advice. I'm Paul Frodge, joined by Mr. Marketing, and for today's conversation, the cunning codifier of cutting costs, Colin Jeffries. Colin, how's it going today?
Oh, Paul, I feel fantastic. I love the alliteration. Very fitting for today's conversation. How are you?
I'm doing real good. I'm interested to get into this topic about cutting costs because, as anything, there's two different points of view, and there's an opportunity to discuss whether it makes sense or whether it doesn't make sense and how to get to the next level with marketing.
Yes, absolutely. What prompted this discussion today is that I was having a conversation with a new marketing leader who backfilled a role of somebody that left. And the interesting conversation I was having with him is that he was cutting costs and looking like a champion. But that works really well for the first year. And then when budget season rolls around and you start looking at budgets for 2025, is the C-suite, are the investors going to want him to cut another 20% or 25%? And if so, has he already cut to the bone? So I think a lot of times a new marketing leader starts and they go through the budget, they get rid of inefficiencies, and then the financial stakeholders see this as a huge victory. So they start asking for more and more cuts the following year and the following year. And that ultimately leads to underperformance. So I'm excited to jump in and talk about how do we fix this?
That totally makes sense. I think, first of all, looking at the opportunity where others that are non-marketers, whether or not in the C-suite, they look at this as an investment or an expense when it comes to marketing and advertising. And I think that's a good place to start.
That is a great spot, I would say, as well, because we can cut different things. It doesn't necessarily have to be the entire budget. We could look at cutting customer acquisition cost. We could look at increasing share of wallet in a way where we're not spending any additional advertising dollars, but we're increasing share of wallet, or all sorts of other things, increasing the margin of every deal that we get, increasing average ticket size, etc. There are ways we can allocate funds where we're not just coming in and strictly reducing, say, media spend or headcount.
Why do you think it is that there's these two different points of views, Colin, where it's investment related or expense related? Those that think it's an expense, why even have a marketing department?
Well, I mean, let's be honest, Paul. There are a couple of different ways we can categorize expenses. We could look at the accounting cost, which is, when you look at payroll, the amount of dollars that you're spending against the people that you are bringing in, and then their productivity and everything. There is a true accounting cost to marketing. We talk about return on ad spend. We talk about return on investment. We're basically taking dollars and we're spending them. And it's really easy to look at that and say, okay, here's what we're spending from an accounting cost perspective. Now, the other way to classify costs, which many marketers look at, is opportunity cost, or what are called economic costs. And the fun thing with that is you can look at it and say, if I don't spend, let's say our cost of acquisition here for the case of example is $100. If I don't spend an incremental $100, I'm losing on a new customer. And maybe that customer's average ticket size is $10,000. Well, for every $100 I invest in marketing, I'm gaining $10,000 for every new sale that I get. And it's really interesting because sometimes we look at as board members and investors and partners and the C-suite, what have you, we look at these and we say, man, we just need to cut expenses right now. And we're looking at accounting costs. And sometimes we go in and we go, man, we need to grow and scale. And we're looking at opportunity and economic costs. So I think the way that we're actually classifying costs can be effective and at least starting that conversation. What about you, Paul? What have you seen in your experience?
Yeah, I agree. In the years that I've been doing marketing and sales and opportunities where looking at cost cutting, it does seem like marketing seems to be. I don't know if it's because I'm so close to it and have always been in this space, but marketing does seem like it's one of those that are first to be cut. And we talk about that all the time. And looking across all different departments, I tend to believe that that's the case. And us as marketers have to argue for every dollar to make sure that we can invest it wisely and have that ROI.
Absolutely. And this is interesting too for today's conversation, where if a new marketing leader steps in, or even if an old marketing leader revamps the way that they're doing things and they go in and they cut budget, let's say they cut media spend, and that can mean a variety of things. I think historically we look at media spend and we say radio, TV, but in today, in 2024, 2025, when we're talking media spend, that might mean paid social, that might mean YouTube pre roll, media spend might mean Google ads. There are all sorts of things that media spend can actually mean. So I've seen this before where a marketing person comes in and they change from a very high SEM strategy over into a very loaded SEO strategy. But instead of spending $200,000 a month on pay per click for Google Ads, they're actually spending $100,000 a month on SEO. So they're cutting that budget by about 1.2 million a year. That's interesting because if they're cutting the bad and redirecting some of those funds into channels that are working or into some untested channels, they'll keep that budget when the next budget year comes around. If they just cut it and they look like they're in a good way under budget, that actually might backfire because there could be an instance where in 2025 they need to shift back into a more PPC heavy strategy. But if they've already reduced the projected dollar spend down by 1.2 million, maybe they don't have the funding to then go be effective. So there are a couple of things to consider when we're looking at cutting bad expense. Maybe we should redirect those funds instead. Maybe we should redirect those funds instead.
I totally agree. There's two different ways to look at it, as we talked about when we opened the episode, and looking at this. And if you are reducing, that makes sense. If you're refocusing dollars into what is returning more of an investment into the company, but the way I also would look at that and argue for marketing departments and agencies out there is if you can avoid cutting the costs and doing 100,000, as you mentioned, into SEO instead of 200 or 250,000. If it truly is working on the SEO side, I know we're just using that as an example, but why not double down on the 200,000 and keep it in SEO if that is truly making an impact instead of just cutting the budget in half?
That's a great point too, Paul. Two areas of caution with that. One is recognizing areas of diminishing returns. I first of all, let me say that I agree with you. Two areas of caution that I would recommend though if somebody's considering that strategy. First is hitting diminishing returns, and second is be careful not to overwhelm the business. I've been in environments where a business has a finite number of salespeople, they have a finite number of implementation or customer success folks, and so if you 2x the business in 2 months, they just don't have the back end support to make sure that those new customers are treated with white glove service, that the implementation goes well, etc. So if what we're going to do is not totally reduce the budget, not totally shift the budget, but maybe we're looking at what I would consider sort of an incremental or temporary reduction, we should be really clear with our stakeholders. So that might mean the board, it might mean the C suite, it might mean investors. It's definitely going to mean our finance and accounting teams. We have to let them know in advance, hey, we're cutting spend temporarily because we're going to test some other options, and then we're going to ramp spend back up once we've discovered areas of diminishing returns, once the business is ready to welcome new leads and new business, et cetera. This can be really helpful if we have a specific rationale, like we're going to reduce spend for 2 months while we onboard 3 new salespeople and 4 new customer success people, and then we're going to ramp spend back up. That way it doesn't look like, to your point with the first sort of topic of conversation, it doesn't look like we're just cutting spend and then we're never going to increase spend again.
That totally makes sense to me. Looking at this also is I often find that when we bring on another client to the agency, I always question where the budget came from to begin with. And oftentimes it was, we call it a PFA number, a pulled from air number. And nobody really knows where that budget originated. Is that the top of the budget from the last 10 years? Is it the low end of the budget from the last 10 years? Have they cut budget for the last 10 years? And I'm always questioning how that was determined and trying to help clients back their way into what a ideal budget would be from a marketing and sales standpoint to make sure that, first of all, from the KPIs that they're wanting to measure, that we can be successful in accomplishing that for the business, right? So whether or not it be the agency or CMOs or marketing directors, I would advise to try to figure out where that original budget came from. Oftentimes, we just want to make the sale, right? As salespeople or as marketers or as agencies, and just assume that that's the budget and it cannot be questioned. And I feel when we are talking to clients and ask those engaging questions and help them determine what makes the most sense, are they in growth mode? Is it an opportunity where they bring on a new product line? We just had a success last week where somebody was bringing on a brand new product line, and it was an opportunity to make 5 to 10 million in the first couple of years. And he was asking us, how should I determine the budget for this? And we backed our way into it using some research and data. And it was an opportunity where he was fully invested into looking at that as an opportunity instead of just throwing out the PFA number like we talked about.
That is an excellent point, Paul. And to build on that, there are often what I would consider capital expenses that marketing departments face periodically. Think of a website rebuild or a content library build out. Think about opportunities where, we have the Olympics going on right now in Paris. Go Team USA. And imagine if you are a business in Paris that sells sporting equipment or branded apparel or something of that nature. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity to sponsor or to partner or to do something that's going to require incremental dollars. So instead of going in and slashing the budget, maybe there's a way where we take a step back and we say, hey, I can do X. I could rebuild the website. I could build an asset library. I could create an online community. I could fill in the blank. I hate to say rebrand. I'm not going to say rebrand. We're going to keep that out because rebrands oftentimes backfire. But you get the idea. There are things where we can step in and we can actually try something new or allocate dollars into a quote unquote marketing capital expense category without just giving up the budget.
Yeah, that's totally makes sense to me. And looking at this, it's really trying to figure out what makes the most sense to agencies, to marketing departments, to those that are responsible for those dollars, and really changing and challenging that status quo on asking the right questions when a budget is going to be reduced, finding out what the reason is. I'm sure there's a purpose that starts at a much higher level than we are, but it's an opportunity to really ask the engaging questions, understand it, and be able to reallocate dollars into what is successful and making sure that the things that we're doing as marketers are going to remain successful. Maybe some of the ancillary or slush fund type of project opportunities may go away, but really staying focused on the core and what makes the most sense.
That's a great point. Moving slowly can also be something that's very potent because as we're discovering what the core really is, as we're discovering who the stakeholders really are and their priorities, we might go in, we might cut SEO spend, but in fact, that's shooting ourselves in the foot because the investors or the partners or what have you actually wanted to shift dollars from PPC into SEO in the future. So there are a lot of things we can go in and we can make incremental adjustments slowly to measure and to ensure that we're doing correctly without risking tipping the boat.
So great conversation talking about budget cuts, how you can use those for your benefit or how you could use those in a different way, and looking at us as marketers trying to figure out what makes the most sense for the businesses that we represent and how we can get the biggest bang for the buck on the ROI. So great conversation, Colin. Looking forward to the next episode.
Until then, keep rethinking those common assumptions.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If people want to connect with us, where should they go, Paul?
RethinkMarketingPodcast.com, Colin. What can listeners do to help us in return for the sage marketing wisdom and our pithy humor?
They can help us by leaving a review on their favorite platform or sharing this episode with a fellow marketer to help them cut through the clutter.
Well, until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions.